Cinderella Man tells the true story of boxing legend James J. Braddock, who made an incredible comeback during the Great Depression. Injured and arthritic, Braddock's promising career was cut short, and he had to go on public assistance when he couldn't get works at the docks in New Jersey. But when an opportunity came for him to get back in the ring and provide for his family, he took it, and his world changed. Now fighting with a purpose, Braddock starts winning fight after fight. He inspires the struggling nation with his perseverance in the midst of hardship. And as his comeback builds steam, he keeps remembering the faces of his children and his wife and how important it is for him to provide for them. Finally, Braddock wins his way into a showdown with the world heavyweight champion Max Baer. Baer, a vicious fighter, is notorious for killing 2 men in the ring. In the days before the fight, he ridicules, threatens, and mocks Braddock. And as the world looks on, there's great concern for Braddock's life. When the big day arrives, Braddock's wife sneaks into the bowels of the arena to find her husband in the locker room just moments before the fight. The look in her eyes sends everyone else from the room, and she marches straight up to Braddock with a tender fierceness that only can come from a loyal wife. She locks her husband in her stare for the final words he'll hear before the big event. She says, "So you just remember who you are. You're the bulldog of Bergen and the pride of New Jersey. You're everybody's hope and the kid's hero, and you are the champion of my heart, James J. Braddock." Remembering who we are truly makes all the difference. Braddock won that fight. It's easy to forget sometimes who we are and who we serve when we are in the fight. In today's story, Joseph is forgotten by others, but he doesn't let that stop him. He chooses to keep focusing on doing the right thing and get up.
Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Good. Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. We're going to go ahead and jump right in here. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief, cupbearer, and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them in the prison where Joseph was, and then in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. And while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. And when Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business." Joseph replied, "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." So this is where we're at in the story. Here they are in prison. They're going through this difficult moment in their time, in their life, and the cupbearer and the chief baker both have these dreams, and they bring them to Joseph, essentially. And so here's what I want you to see. The first thing in this morning is you got to stay focused on others while going through your fight. Look at this. Joseph could have become very self-focused while going through the fight of his life. He could have wallowed in his own self-pity. He could have ignored others around him. He could have looked out for his own interest. Yet he chose not to do that. He chose to focus on other people. Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker both had their dream. They both had these dreams, and they were upset about this because it was one of those dreams where they knew that there was some kind of meaning tied to it. Have you ever had a dream like that where you knew that this wasn't just like the pizza you ate last night? It was like something that the Lord was trying to speak or communicate something to you through a dream, and you were confused. And here they were. These guys were in prison. They had these dreams, and they were upset with the meaning of the dream. Verse 6 says, when Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Joseph had just woke up. His first reaction was to notice somebody else had a problem. He asked them what was wrong. They told him they had dreams and no one could share their meaning. He then tells them Go ahead and tell me your dreams. Tell me what's going on. And here's what I want you to see this morning. There's a tendency when we are working through something in our life to become self-centered and self-focused. It becomes all about our problem. Everything is about what we're going through. Everything is about the trial we are facing. Everything is about the drama in our life. What we're dealing with, what we're going through at this moment. But like Joseph, what we have to understand is you may be the catalyst to help somebody else in their fight. While Joseph is going through the fight of his life, he's able to look at somebody else and help them. Galatians chapter 6 verse 2 says, share each other's burdens. And in this way, obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. Well, that's not in those little, bread for today, things that Grandma used to have. And I've never read that one. You are not that important. That's not even on a fortune cookie. I'm telling you, that's not there. I mean, it's just not. That's not a scripture we want to hear, but it's truth. We have to share each other's burdens, and in this way we fulfill the law of Christ, because if we think we're too important to help somebody, we're only fooling ourselves because we're really not that important. We're just one peg in this whole thing called life that God is setting us up for something supernatural if we'll get our eyes off of ourselves and put our eyes on other people. So how do we do that? Look at the next thing. You got to stay connected to God while going through your fight. You have to stay connected to God while going through your fight. Look at verse 7. Why do you look so worried today? He asked them. And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead and tell me your dreams. I want you to see something here. Joseph couldn't interpret dreams without being connected to God. Why is that? Because interpreting dreams is God's business. That's what he said. Interpreting dreams is God's business. So here's what I want you to also see this morning is that there's another tendency. Another tendency I've noticed in people is that when they're walking through a difficult time, they tend to run away from God. They say things like, my life was easier before I was a Christian. I've got to get this figured out before I can come back to church. Oh, I've heard that one a lot. I can't come to church right now because I got problems. No, you need to come to church because you have problems. You need to get in the house of God with people that love and care about you, can wrap their arms of love around you, and can help you walk through the fight of your life that you're going through. Some people say, well, if God loved me, He wouldn't let me go through this. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. How many know that there's nothing that I would not do for my kids? God's the same way. There's nothing that He wouldn't have done for Jesus. Yet He loved you and I so much that He freely gave of His Son so that we could have everlasting life. I want you to understand, God loves you. He cares about you. Just because you're walking through a difficult time doesn't mean He doesn't love you. He loved Joseph, and He was setting Joseph up to save a nation. You don't know the ramifications of what you're walking through right now might be something that's going to be a catalyst for change in our culture later on. You have to realize that God cares about you and He's setting you up for His purpose and His plan. Oh, my life would be easier if I wasn't going to church, if I wasn't a Christian, all this. So what do people do? They look elsewhere for help. They call their friends before they call on God. They look for self-help books and things like that can help instead of going to the Word of God and seeing what it says. They call on their friends. They try to figure it out themselves. They've got, if I did this and if I did that and I kind of robbed this to pay this, I could all do this and all that, and they got to figure it out, all the while neglecting their relationship with God. Joseph didn't do that, though. He stayed connected to God through the fight. He stayed connected. Here he is in prison, and the first thing he does when he wakes up in the morning is he looks at these guys and says, "What's wrong with you?" And the only reason that he could interpret their dreams is because he was connected to God. During the Last Supper, John documented the last instructions that Jesus gave his disciples. And one of those instructions was the importance of us staying connected to God. The disciples were about to go through the fight of their life, and Jesus knew they couldn't be fruitful apart from it. He said in John 15:4, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Then you remain in me, and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing." So you have to stay connected. Whatever you're going through, listen, I get it. It's rough sometimes when we're walking through difficult circumstances or walking through difficult situations, and we feel like we want to give up. We feel like we just want to say, "I've had enough of this. I've done everything that I can do. I've had enough." Listen, stay connected to God, because apart from Him, you can do nothing. Apart from God, we are nothing. And we need to make sure that we're staying connected to Him. So what happens next in our story? They both tell him their dreams. The chief cupbearer's dream meant restoration to his former position. Well, the chief baker's dream, well, it had something to do with the meaning of being impaled on a pole and death. But, I mean, you know, two different meanings. But what happened next was that both dreams became a reality. And so Joseph had one request of the chief cupbearer. He said this in verse 14 of chapter 40. "Please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it." Right? So the chief cupbearer goes back. You can imagine what happens next. He's so overwhelmed with gratitude for what Joseph did to him that he marches right into Pharaoh and tells him all about Joseph. Nope, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. The chief cupbearer is restored to his position, but he forgets about Joseph. You may feel like people, write this in your notes, forget about you while you're in your fight. You may feel like people forget about you while you're in your fight. Look at verse 23. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Now, this has to be demoralizing. You think that this is your way out? What looks like your way out of prison quickly becomes just another rejection. Have you ever been in a situation and thought that there was someone who could help you get out of that situation only to be forgotten? Only to call them and say, "Hey, did you ask your boss about that position? Did you help me with this?" And they say, "Oh man, I totally forgot. I'm sorry, I blew it." Or all of a sudden they volunteer to help you. Has this one happened before? They volunteer to help you and help you get out of your situation, and then you call them and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry." Then you call them again. "Oh, I'm sorry." Then you call them a third time. It's like, "Oh man, I'm really sorry. I'm going to get to that next week. I'm going to get to that tomorrow. Or I'll get to it today." And then the fourth call, straight to voicemail. The fifth call, straight to voicemail. Then you see them a week later at the downtown square or at the Walmart, and you see them do one of this. Come on. It's demoralizing. See, it's in these moments we need to trust in God and not people. It's in these moments that we have to put our faith in Him and not in other people. While He uses people, our source of help is not people. People are going to disappoint us. People will forget about us. People will overpromise and they will underdeliver. People can't see the big picture. People will fail. But let me tell you something this morning, church. God is eternal. God is omniscient. God is omnipresent. God is omnipotent. He's all-knowing. He's always present. He's all-powerful. He knows what you're going through and how to best get you out of the circumstance that you are in. I believe the psalmist said it best. In Psalm chapter 121, it says, I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? Now, what was he talking about there? This was called a song of the ascent. And what they would do is they were ascending up to Jerusalem because Jerusalem was set up on a hill. And so as they would take that ascent up to Jerusalem, they would sing these songs. And so they're looking up to Jerusalem. They're looking up to the temple. They're looking up to the things. And they're saying, I look up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? Are they saying that their help's coming from the mountain? Are they saying that it's come from Jerusalem? Are they even saying that it's coming from the temple? No, here's what they say. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let you stumble. The one who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel never slumbers or sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord stands beside you as your protective shade. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon at night. The Lord keeps you from all harm and watches over your life. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come and go, both now and forever. Listen, people may forget you. People may let you down, but God is faithful. God is faithful. He watches over you. Listen, He knew when you were sleeping last night and you were watching over your life. He's watching over your home. He's watching over your finances. He's watching over your children. He's watching over your grandchildren. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come and as you go, both now and forever. So when you feel like you've been forgotten by people, remember God is with you. God is watching over you. 2 full years later, Pharaoh has 2 dreams. In the first one, 7 healthy cows come up out of the Nile River and they begin to graze. Then 7 scrawny looking cows come up out of the river and they eat the 7 healthy cows. And he's like, whoa, whoa. Then he has a second dream. Same night, second dream. 7 heads of grain. They're plump. They're beautiful. They're on one stalk. Grow on a single stalk. I mean, it's awesome. And then all of a sudden, 7 more heads of grain appear. But these are shriveled. They're withered. They're nasty looking. And they swallow up the 7 plump heads of grain. So Pharaoh's distraught. I mean, he's like, this obviously means something. I don't know what it means, but 7, I've got 2 different groups of 7 here. 7 healthy cows, 7 healthy grains, 7 scrawny-looking cows, 7 scrawny-looking heads of grain. They're consumed. I don't know the meaning. I got to figure this out. So he begins to go around, search all throughout his kingdom, trying to find somebody who can interpret a dream. That's when the cupbearer remembers Joseph. I want you to see this. God knows where you're at, and He positions you at the right place at the right time. God knows where you are at, and He positions you at the right place at the right time. Genesis 41 verse 9. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I have been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. And one night the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. So what happened? The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy, plump, and beautiful heads of grain all represented 7 years of increase. They were going to have 7 years of increase in the land. But then he said the 7 scrawny-looking cows and the 7 withered heads of grain represented 7 years of famine. So the 7 years of famine would kind of swallow up the 7 years of increase, and everything that they thought was such a blessing in the first 7 years would now, they wouldn't have any food, and all of this bad stuff was happening, and they would completely forget about the 7 years of prosperity. That was the interpretation of the dream. And because Pharaoh had 2 dreams about it, it was going to happen very quickly. So Joseph makes a suggestion to Pharaoh. He said, you need to find somebody who's wise. And I don't know that he was doing that, but he just says, you need to find somebody who's wise to oversee this giant food program that would collect 1/5 of the crops during the good years so that there would be enough food to eat during the years of famine. Otherwise, the land's going to be destroyed. Genesis chapter 41, verse 37. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dream to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a higher rank than yours. God placed Joseph in the right place at the right time. Starts back. He thinks he'd been forgotten. He thinks that everything is wrong. I mean, he'd woke up this morning. How many of you are morning people? Let me see your hand. Wow, I am shocked. How many of you are normal and are not morning people? Let me see your hand. That's kind of 50-50 in here. I'm surprised at that. I'm not a morning person. I kind of got to get up and get going. And as you can see, I think my whole family raised their hand that they're not morning people. And so, there's like grunts and stuff, until after about 30 minutes we've been awake. And then we're all kind of, okay, now we're awake. Joseph looked at these folks, the chief baker and chief cupbearer, not being a morning person, maybe he was, but I'm telling you, I'm not. So I put myself in that position. Yet he still was at the right place at the right time in that moment. He thought he wasn't. Listen, I want you to get this. He thought he had been forgotten. He thought he wasn't in the right place at the right time. But God put him right there at that moment so that he could interpret those dreams, so that 2 full years later, this guy would remember him. The chief cupbearer would remember him and go back to that moment and say, 2 years ago, this guy interpreted my dreams. I remember my failure. I was supposed to talk to you about it, and I completely forgot, and now here it is. And he said, well, let's bring him out right now. God places you in the right place at the right time. Although Joseph was temporarily forgotten by man, God knew exactly where he was the entire time. Come on, somebody. That's good. Whatever you're walking through, God knows where you're at. He knows what you're going through, and he knows who you are. Going back to the video that we showed this morning at the beginning of service, Braddock's wife said to him in Cinderella Man, you need to remember who you are. Church, let me tell you, you need to remember who you are. Even when you've been forgotten by man, you need to remember who you are, because you are a child of God. You are a chosen generation. You are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You are forgiven. You are loved. You are highly flavored and blessed. You are more than a conqueror. You are who God says you are, not who the enemy says you are. When you are down on the mat, remember who you are. You are the child of God. You are a king's kid. You are somebody that He is setting up for a future success. Somebody who He's setting up for a future ministry. He's setting you up. And you need to remember that God is not through with you yet. He has not forgotten you. When you're down on the mat, get back up. Man, when life knocks you down, get back up. Come on, would you stand with me this morning?